Thank you for joining us today. We'll begin in a few moments. For those of you just joining us, we'll begin in just a minute. Welcome and Happy New Year. My name is Piper Chapman, and I am the Assistant Director at Harvard Alumni Travels. Thank you for joining us today for our travel talk. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. I know many of us are quite familiar with Zoom webinar. However, for those of you joining us for the first time, I'd like to mention a few technical observations to best prepare you for this lecture. Throughout the talk, your microphone will be muted and your video will be turned off so we can direct our attention to our speaker. However, the chat feature at the bottom of your screen will be on and accessible throughout the lecture, so please feel free to include your comments in the chat box and your questions in the Q&A box. We are offering live closed captioning during this lecture. For those of you interested in using this feature, please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Our webinar, which will be recorded, will last 1 hour, including time for Q&A. And finally, while we hope this lecture will run smoothly, we could experience glitches or delays in speech due to the constraints of technology and the embedded videos within this talk. We appreciate your patience and understanding should this occur. If you are having Zoom technical difficulties, please note this lecture is live streamed to YouTube, so you are welcome to join us that way. Please find the YouTube link in the chat. My favorite way to start our talk is by inviting all of you to enter your location in the chat so we can see where we're all tuning in from. Wow, it looks like we have about 700 people virtually gathered here today from all over the world. Thank you again for joining us. Now to our Travel Talks lecture. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce David A. Aguilar, former Director of Public Affairs and Science Information at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. A naturalist, astronomer, author, and space artist, David's expertise lies in his enlightening ability to communicate science. He is the author and illustrator of 7 National Geographic and 3 Random House books on astronomy. In 2015, he directed the NASA's New Horizons mission special media team during the fly-by close encounter of Pluto. His contributions to the scientific world are vast and immeasurable. David and his wife, Shirley, have shared their knowledge and warmth with over 270 Harvard travelers, many of whom are with us today. So let's turn things over to David to begin his lecture, A Tale of Two Poles.
Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here. I think this is day 11,000 of our captivity with COVID, but I do appreciate you joining me today, seeing that there's not much going on in the news. And I just wanted to shout out to a lot of the travelers that have been with us around the world before. Today, we're going to take a look at the poles. And certainly the poles are something we don't normally think about. I don't think most of us get up in the morning and wonder what's happening at the North Pole. But the Arctic regions of our planet are where small problems can suddenly become catastrophes. And so in today's presentation, I wanted to cover three topics. The first topic, A Tale of Two Poles, will be the dynamics of these frozen lands in time. They have remained, at least in the history of human beings, pretty much where they are and how we find them today. The second area we're going to take a look at are at the edges of human exploration. What drove people to explore these distant lands? And third, I want to talk about what the poles are telling us today. If we take a look at our planet Earth, the planet most of us come from, we can see that it's divided into really four separate areas. We have the tropical zone across the middle of it, the two temperate zones below and above it, and then the frozen polar regions at the very top and the very bottom. The Greeks named these frozen regions Arctikos, which means of the bear. We've shortened these names to Arctic, and the opposite would be the Antarctic. So actually, these names have Greek origins. When we take a look at the sky and why they would name it after the bear, it's because of these constellations. We call this the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, some of the first constellations we learn as we're looking at the sky. And as most campers and most scouts will know, that if you use the two stars at the bottom of the Big Dipper, it points to this star, Polaris, what is currently our North Star here on planet Earth. The Babylonians used this for navigation, the Mesopotamians used it, the Greeks, all sorts of cultures have used this star to centralize where they were on the surface of the planet Earth. Now, the Greeks called it Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the big bear and the little bear. And the big bear was female, and she was guarding her little bear as it moved through the sky. She watched it very closely because the tail of the little bear is Polaris, and they didn't want that star to be lost. So consequently, the bears moved around the sky, pointing out this very important constellation. This is how important it was. If we take a look at the position of the Big Dipper in summer, in fall, in winter, and in spring, it creates this pattern. And you've seen this before. You've seen it in Native American pottery. You've seen it in Middle Eastern architecture. And in 1938, of course, it was taken over by the Nazis as their sign that meant eternal life, never changing. When you think of the poles, everybody might stop for a moment and say, well, they're pretty much the same. This is not true. They're very different from each other. We can have some generalizations of what it's like. The poles are the coldest places on Earth. The coldest it will reach is minus 136 degrees Fahrenheit. The warmest they will reach is about 58 degrees. The winds can blow for months at 200 miles an hour. And this is critical. 70% of the world's fresh water is contained at the poles, locked up as ice. We're going to come back to this a little bit later. Now, we're used to seeing constellations and stars rise in the early evening and set at dawn. We see them change seasonally, but if you were at the North Pole or the South Pole, that would never happen. The stars would spin around like you were in the middle of a giant merry-go-round. They would never set, they would never rise, and they would never change. That's because at the top and the bottom of the Earth, we're now looking at the polar alignment in outer space. Something else really odd to get used to when you're at the poles is that days and nights are not the same. Days last for months. A night lasts for months. And in between, you have these very odd twilight zones. Now take a look at this picture. Look at it really close. Some of you are seeing a beautiful sunset. Some of you may say, this is a gorgeous sunrise. But what is happening in this picture is I photographed this off the side of the ship. This is the lowest the sun reached in the sky, and it's now rising back up. And by the way, this is 1:30 a.m. in the morning. This is the white nights on the polar regions on planet Earth. Also, because of the Earth's magnetic field, all that energy is funneled into the North and the South Pole, exciting electrons that move across the sky as the aurora borealis. Some people thought they were spirits. Some people thought they were gods sending messages back to Earth. I must say to you, this is the most remarkable sight you may ever see. They do really ripple and undulate across the sky. And what this is telling us is the Earth's magnetic fields are protecting us from solar radiation. This is the aurora borealis that you'll only see at the poles on planet Earth. And it means all of us are being protected. If we were to take a look at the North Pole, this is about where it is on our map. Most of what you see is just ice floating in the ocean. To the right, that's Greenland, and the little island to the right of Greenland is Iceland, sitting out there in the North Atlantic Ocean. If we take a look at the Antarctic, there's the South Pole right there, and you can see the ice sheets surrounding the continent Antarctica around them. To the right, that little brown area is Ushuaia, the tip of South America. And this is how it lines up on our poles. Now, if you were to go to Antarctica 200 million years ago, this is what you'd find. Wait a minute. That doesn't look like the Antarctica I know. I didn't see dinosaurs roaming over the countryside in beautiful green trees. And it reminds me of an old saying by Mae West. I love this. My grandmother loved W.C. Fields and Mae West. And she said, I used to be Snow White, but I drifted. If Antarctica could speak, it would say this to us. I used to be tropical, but now I'm Snow White. What happened? Continental drift. Watch this. Back 250 million years ago, look at Pangaea break up, coming apart. There goes the United States, it's pulling out. Here goes Australia, Antarctica, and India. They're separating. Oh, South America is just separated from Africa. Australia is going to the right. Here comes India. Bang! It's just smashed into the continent and created the Himalayan mountains. And there goes Antarctica to its current resting place. This is what Antarctica looks like today. And here's the interesting aspect of this. We see penguins, birds, and yet they are the results of the dinosaurs. They're what left. There's what's left of what the dinosaurs were, and this is what they evolved into. So oddly enough, Antarctica still has the ancestors of the dinosaurs walking over its surface. Let's do a quick comparison between the two. The Arctic has ice sheets of ice sitting on open oceans surrounded by continents. The ice sheets average 6 to 10 feet in thickness, and the ocean depth beneath them drops down beyond 13,000 feet. The Arctic is land ice limited to Greenland. It's the only place you're going to find land ice. The Antarctic, on the other hand, is a continent surrounded by oceans. 97% of the land is covered by ice, equaling an area 1.5 times bigger than the United States. The Arctic at the North Pole is 9 feet above sea level. Icebergs form seasonally. They average in size measured in cubic yards, although if you ask the people on the Titanic, they'll agree they can get big. The Antarctic, on the other hand, has an elevation at the pole of 9,300 feet above sea level. And the average continental temperature for the full year in Antarctica is minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Icebergs calve all year long. Size can range up to 50 cubic miles. And I must say this, there is nothing more amazing than to see a 30 or 40-story iceberg go floating by that is the size of the city of Los Angeles. It is awesome to see. The Arctic is surrounded by tundra and trees. It looks something like this. And this is critical. Look at that tundra, because we're going to come back and talk about that later. The Antarctic has no tundra or trees, and it mostly always looks just like this. The Arctic is alive with terrestrial mammals. We have your musk oxes. We have your moose. We have your wolverines. We have marmots. We have pikas. We have elk. We have reindeer. We have silver foxes. And of course, we have polar bears. But the Antarctic does not have any terrestrial mammals living on it. The Arctic has a long history of human inhabitants dating back 45,000 years. Population today exceeds 4 million. There's huge commercial development taking place in the Arctic. They're looking for minerals, diamonds. They're drilling for oil and gas, huge fishing industries. There are reindeer farms popping up everywhere run by Russians and Scandinavians selling the meat in markets. They're now raising hay to feed these animals. And of course, shipping and commerce is huge moving through this particular area. On the other hand, the Antarctic has no history of primitive humans. The population varies from 1,000 to 4,000 scientists. In 2019, 50,000 tourists visited Antarctica. It remains a science preserve. But let me say something about those 50,000 tourists. They only visit in one particular area on the peninsula. They don't visit the rest of Antarctica. They come in small ships. There is no pollution. There is nothing left behind. In the last 2 journeys I've been to Antarctica, I've never seen another group of people there. So it still remains quite pristine. I want to talk a little bit about the edges of human exploration. And this is something I really try and understand sometimes. I live here in the Colorado Rockies at about 7,000 feet. I got up this morning, and with the wind chill, it was 5 degrees outside. I did not want to spend a lot of time out there. Moving between the house and the artist studio, I moved rather quickly. That is cold. And yet for the explorers that went to the North Pole and the South Pole, they persevered in conditions that I can't even imagine how they did it. The first exploration of any pole began in 1897 with the assault on the North Pole. Solomon August Andrée had talked the King of Sweden and Alfred Nobel into financing his balloon expedition, because at this time period, balloons were the big deal. We didn't have airplanes yet, but the aeronauts flying balloons were heroes. So he decided that what he was going to do is put together a hydrogen balloon. He was going to float from Sweden somewhere over the North Pole and land maybe either in Russia or Canada. He wasn't sure which way the winds might be blowing. And so off he went on his expedition. Now, 2 things he might have thought about before he left was, 1, to check whether or not the rope system he had hanging below the balloon with weights on them were actually going to keep him from floating away and moving along the ice. The other thing probably was a really good idea is he should have checked whether or not the brand new balloon he'd received could hold the hydrogen gas in it and not leaked. 2 days into his adventure, all the hydrogen gas leaked out, and down on the ice, he and his 2 crew members went. They disappeared from history. They were lost in time. 30 years later, a group of sealers moving out over the ice found the remains of the balloon. They found the skeletons. They found everything that had been left behind by Andre's expedition. And they also found a camera that had rolls of film in it. And that's where this photograph came from. When they developed the film, there it was, their disaster on ice. Well, they brought the bodies home, and 30 years later, it was the biggest funeral Sweden had ever seen for their three heroes. Here it was, the end of an expedition that probably could have used a little bit more planning. So the North Pole was the easiest to reach, and now we have Robert Peary. He's an explorer. He's a military person. He has been through Greenland. He has moved on many expeditions. He's tried on 7 different attempts to reach the North Pole. And now on his 8th attempt, he's going to get lucky. As he moves out over the ice, he goes out with 3 Inuits and Matthew Alexander Henson, his navigator. As they move across the ice, they move rather swiftly. And on April 6th, 1909, they make it to the North Pole. Oh, the world goes crazy. Arctic explorer Peary says he has discovered the North Pole. What an amazing adventure. What an amazing accomplishment. But just as quickly as he announced he's made it to the North Pole, Dr. Frederick Cook announces, I've already been there. I was there on April 21st, 1908. And now the media is really confused. American locates the North Pole a year ago last year. Well, now the debate raged. They asked, why didn't Dr. Cook get back sooner? Why didn't he announce his announcement? Well, what happened is they got lost on the ice. And as the icebergs broke up, they had to wait till they could hop from one iceberg to the next, trying to get back. And then they got caught and spent 4 months in a cave. They ran out of ammunition. They built spears to hunt, to survive. And by the time he got back, Peary had already announced he'd been to the North Pole. Well, great debate took place. Who had been there first? Who really owned the honor of discovering and standing on the North Pole? Well, it turns out when they took a look at their records and their logs, they had both made about the same distance, but it turns out that Cook may have been well over 100 miles off on his estimation where the North Pole was, while Peary was probably no more than 8 to 20 miles off in his estimation. And so Peary was given the honor of being the first human being to reach the North Pole, and the North Pole was now closed to future explorers to find that magical location. So that left Antarctica. And Antarctica was an interesting place because for many years, not many people even believed it existed. When Captain Cook was on his South Pacific voyages, he sailed into the Arctic Circle in 1774. And couldn't believe that any land could exist beyond where he was. There were too many icebergs. And so he left it. And actually, if it had been a clear day where he was, he might have spotted it. But that wasn't going to happen for many years. It finally took place on January 27th in 1820 when Fabian von Bellinghausen, I love that name, Fabian von Bellinghausen was a German cartographer working for a Russian expedition. He looked out as they were traveling through the ice, and there it was. He spotted Antarctica. And oddly enough, it only took a year for the Australian captain, John Davies, to step foot onto Antarctica, the first human ever to do so. So now a new continent had been discovered. It was open to exploration. It was open to discovery. And the Brits were the first ones to take the world up on it. But I have to say something different about the northern exploration as opposed to the southern. There are some things that we take for granted and we don't even realize can be problems. One of the first things Antarctic explorers discovered was this. Anything you put in a metal can, you could never touch it with your fingers because it was simply too cold. If you held a can of food, like we see here, with your bare hands, you'd leave your fingerprints behind. And as one young navigator found, much to his distress, as he held a sextant up to his eyes, when he pulled it away, his eyelid went with it. So you had to cover anything made of metal because the temperatures were so cold. Another thing the explorers suffered from was scurvy. We'd heard about it aboard ships when early explorers had scurvy, a terrible ailment. You felt lethargic, you felt tired, you felt fatigued, your gums bled, your teeth fell out, and every one of the Antarctic explorers suffered from this because they weren't bringing vitamin C and fruits along with them. They were taking food that had the highest energy possible so that they could survive in these severe environments. They all suffered from frostbite. This is a minor case of frostbite. Every one of the explorers that came back had lost fingers, had lost toes, some lost their feet, they lost their ears, some even lost their nose. Frostbite was difficult to deal with. And the only way to defrost it, they tried rubbing snow on it, but it was so cold, the snow crystals acted like sand. They sanded your skin right off. So they were constantly suffering from frostbite. And here's one other thing that they suffered from: loneliness and the fact that the Arctic regions are different than any other place on Earth. Antarctica still stays with me. It is the only place I've been where there is virtually no sound. It's deafening, it is so quiet. And you may think, well, I have that at home, but no, listen, that fan is running in your house. A car is passing by out front. You can hear somebody walking their dog talking as they go by. But the solitude of the poles is truly remarkable, that every human should experience, because there's nothing else like it on planet Earth. The British decided that the South Pole was going to belong to them, and they began with Robert Falcon Scott, a commander, a ship's commander, an explorer. He was sent to the South Pole on a scientific expedition. And on his first expedition, the Discovery Expedition of 1901 to 1904, he moved within 500 miles of the South Pole. While he was there, he set up Camp Evans, where we call McMurdo Sound today. And inside of it, it was quite cozy. His men lived inside of it as he put together his expedition, as he moved out on the ice looking for specimens to collect and bring back. When he returned home, he was a hero. No Brit, no person in the world had ever done this before. And as he sat home, speaking engagements, a star at different openings, he was already scheming to go back. He wanted to go back and collect more specimens, but he really wanted to find the South Pole of planet Earth and stand on it. And so he put together the Terra Nova expedition to go back and find and stand on the South Pole of Earth. This is how he planned to do it. Camp Evans, or as we call it today, McMurdo, sits on the Ross Ice Shelf. That's that gray area. He would stage at McMurdo, move across the ice shelf, move through the Transantarctic mountain range, and there it was, his prize, the South Pole of the planet Earth. And then he would move back along this trail, back to McMurdo, and finish the process. Along the way, he planned carefully. He sent out depot stations, his men, to put up these depot stations with more fuel and more food so they could move freely back and forth. He also had a trick up his sleeve. He had decided that now it was the turn of the century. They were making airplanes, they were building tanks, they were making all these wonderful mechanical devices. He was going to take 3 mechanical sledges with him to haul all the equipment that they needed to take. They had tracks to go into the ice just like a tank did. He also decided he was bringing ponies, 19 of them, to help them set up all the depots and to haul their supplies across the ice. Because unlike other explorers, he was not big on dogs. He brought some, but he didn't see dogs pulling dog sleds as the methods for him to get across the ice and reach his goal. Now, remember I said earlier, the Arctic is where small problems can cascade into a crisis. Well, 2 of those sledges never started up. It was too cold. They just couldn't get them to run. And the 3rd sledge that they did get running, one day the ice opened up and blunk, there it went into the middle of the ocean and disappeared forever. And those 19 ponies he brought, 2 of them passed away on the ship as they hit a big storm coming into Antarctica. 3 more died from exhaustion before they could get going. 2 died from eating sand because it had salt in it. And he found that actually their legs were too thin. They couldn't carry anything on the ice. They sunk all the way up to their bellies. Well, they tried to make makeshift snowshoes out of wood. Some of them worked, but they really didn't work that well. So there he was with 12 ponies, not quite sure what to do with them. But Mother Nature in Antarctica took care of that problem. One morning, there was a gigantic crack on the ice. His men came running out of the tents to see what had happened, and they were aghast to see that the ice had split open, and on the iceberg floating away were their 12 ponies. They ran around. What do we do? How do we bring them back? That was quickly answered when one fin popped out of the water. A second fin popped out of the water, a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Suddenly there were 12 orcas, killer whales, circling around that ice floe with the panicked horses bobbing back and forth as it bobbed up and down in the water. The killer whales jumped up on the ice and screamed at the ponies. They panicked, slipped and fell, and one by one dropped into the ocean and became dinner for the 12 orcas that were swimming around. So now he was left with a few dogs to reach the South Pole. And this is where he made a mistake. He decided that humans, his crew, would have to tow all the equipment to the South Pole. Now, how far a journey was this? It was almost 1,000 miles. Think about hauling that 400-pound sledge by foot without cross-country skis across the ice from San Francisco to Denver, and then back again. And so that's how he now was going to move out across the ice after all of his careful planning to reach the South Pole. Meanwhile, sitting back home in Norway was Roald Amundsen. Roald Amundsen's a very interesting character. He started at a young age of 12, one night skiing. Well, one night lasted months at that time period. He skied 60 miles cross country just to see if he could survive, what it was like to live outdoors in conditions that most people would never venture out into. He had been across Greenland many times. He'd lived with the Inuits, in fact, fathered 3 children by them, because he wanted to go to the North Pole. He had his ship, the Fram, ready in Norway, ready to go, when he'd heard that Robert Peary had made it to the North Pole. He was done. His adventure was off. His investors would be furious. But this is a man who said, only a fool learns from his mistakes. The wise man learns from others. And more importantly, he said, luck is something you can plan. And so, sitting there off the coast of Norway in his ship, now that his plans to go to the North Pole were over with, he looked south, told his brother aboard ship and the captain and no one else, sail, we're heading for Antarctica. Now, he had heard of Scott's expedition. They had announced it years ahead of time. He knew that Scott was down there preparing for this trip, taking his time. And so Amundsen took off, and off they went. And his biggest gamble was he was going to start the journey 1 month earlier than Robert Falcon Scott. He was going to gamble that the weather would not stop them and that he would get there first. And on December 14th, 1911, Roald Amundsen lifted the Norwegian flag at the South Pole, and he had conquered the South Pole, the first human to ever do this. He had also taken a look at Scott's writings, his log, and realized that if he started at a slightly different place, it was 100 miles shorter on the journey. And when he went through the Transantarctic mountain range, it was an easier area to pass through. So doing his homework, he'd looked ahead and it had paid off. Well, 34 days later, when Scott shows up at the South Pole and there's a Norwegian flag flying, he was devastated. The worst has happened. The Norwegians are first at the pole. There is no optimism. There is no joy. And then, earlier in the season than they had planned, the foul weather set in. He had also made one other mistake on this journey. Being of the upper class in Britain, and the group that had traveled with him to the South Pole, he had decided at the last minute to add Edgar Evans, one of the sailors aboard, so that a common person could also share in the discovery of the South Pole. But what he had not done was brought enough food. They had only stockpiled enough for 4 people, and now there were 5. And what they had also discovered was that they were burning twice as many calories every day hauling their sleds through the ice than they were taking in with the food that they had brought. It was a recipe for disaster. Ed Wilson, the doctor, was there. Edgar Evans, the sailor, was there. Robert Scott was there. Lawrence Oates, a naturalist, was there. And Henry Bowers was there, the navigator. The last day this photograph was taken, Henry Bowers had a string in his hand when he pulled the shutter on the camera. After this picture was taken the next day, Edgar Evans fell into a crevasse. He badly hurt his leg, and he was never quite the same after that. For 2 days, they struggled through the snow. He fell again, and he never got up. He was gone. As the storm now surged, it was minus 40 degrees below zero. A blizzard was blowing at 40 and 50 miles an hour. The men were now all huddled inside of one tent, running out of supplies. Lawrence Oates, who had frostbite of his hands, his feet, he could not walk, stumbled to the door and said, "I'm going to take a walk. It may be a while before I'm back." He never returned. So now the 3 of them, huddled inside this tent, wrote in their diaries about the last days of their life. And on March 29th, 1912, Ed Wilson passed away, Henry Bowers passed away, and Robert Falcon Scott passed away. The world was devastated. These explorers who were on this mission had passed. Around the world, the headlines were seen. Captain Scott reaches South Pole, but perishes on return journey. And this is an odd thing. In this instance, the loser became the winner. And the winner was condemned for putting this race together, for forcing Scott to explore and maybe accelerate and move quicker than he should have. And for Roald Amundsen, it was a bittersweet victory. He wasn't a happy man. And he passed in life regretting what had happened and how the world had reacted to this grand race to send humans to the bottom of the earth. But here's the beauty of it all. Everybody was focused on the race. Everybody was focused on being first to the South Pole. And 30 years later, when Robert Falcon Scott and his 2 compatriots were found still frozen in their tent by explorers out on the ice, they discovered something else. In that tent were rock samples, and out of those rock samples were fossils. This is Glossopteris. It is the leaves of a tree there in Antarctica that survived and existed 200 million years ago. All of a sudden, it brought question into Antarctica. Obviously, it had not always been covered with ice and snow. Do the continents drift? Does the Earth change? Is the Earth not a static planet? All of a sudden, it opened the door to science that nobody had expected. Which brings us to the science today of what are the poles telling us about our own planet Earth. I must say, the Arctic and Antarctic regions are the most glorious places you will ever see. The colors blue and green and black and white are everywhere. It's a cornucopia of beauty. And once again, we said in the beginning, the poles hold 70% of Earth's fresh water in the form of ice. And this is very important because the poles are disappearing. Look at this picture to the right, 1984 compared to 2019, how the polar ice fields on the North Pole are shrinking. Since 1980, Arctic ice has shrunk by 40%. By 2050, the North Pole may be clear, open water. The ancient search for the Northwest Passage is over. There's no need now to move around the icebergs. In just a few short decades, the North Pole may be clear and open water from that day forward because it's warming so much. When we take a look at Antarctica, there's the peninsula where most people come in and visit. The research station is down below near the Transantarctic Mountains where scientists go. But the western side is melting faster than we've ever seen before. And this has a lot of ice and a lot of fresh water caught up. I mentioned before, there is nothing as awesome as seeing some of these icebergs, 30, 40 stories tall, the size of large cities go floating by. And when you look at that ice, realize 70% of it is hidden underwater. We see the icebergs calving, melting into the oceans. And since 1980, global ocean levels have risen 8 inches over a 140-year period. But since 1995, they have risen 3 inches, rapidly altering global coastlines and impacting commerce by displacing communities. Oceans absorb 90% of the atmospheric heat, and that's the difference between the North Pole and the South Pole. The North Pole, because the ice is thinner, is melting quicker. But the South Pole, because it has the Arctic Ocean surrounding it, is absorbing all of this heat. Actually, in the South Pole, the icebergs are melting from within, not on top. Future rising temperatures may drastically alter global ocean currents and weather patterns in ways we've never experienced before. By 2100, global seas may rise 6 to 10 feet, displacing hundreds of millions of people. And look at that little polar bear out there on the ice. By century's end, polar bears may be extinct. We're seeing it all around us today, the strangest, most bizarre weather that we've ever experienced. This headline came out of the newspaper 3 days ago. Extreme ocean effects snow hammer Japan, trapping 1,200 drivers. Some places have 11 feet of snow on the ground. This came out today. In the past 7 years, right now is the hottest on record we have ever seen since 1880, and the last 7 years are the hottest. Temperatures on Earth just keep going up because of the carbon-based fuels that we're burning. We've never seen this before. 3 hurricanes forming at the same time in the Atlantic because the water is so warm. We haven't seen the flooding in Venice that we see lately. We haven't seen the storm surge on the western or eastern coast of the United States moving so far inland when these hurricanes move through. This is part of climate change. Look at this map. By 2080, these are the areas we feel may be impacted by climate change, the blue areas especially, with salt water intruding into fresh water, with erosion. And the dark red areas you see are where they're predicting people in the United States may be migrating to get away from some of these areas, this land that we're losing. Here's the one that worries me so much. We've been hearing about the out of control fires in Australia that we've never seen before. We've heard about the fires in California that burned for months and months and months. Look at this picture. This is very personal. See the sign up there that says Whole Foods? That's where we shop for our groceries. And that fire that was here in Colorado 2 years ago, if you extended that mountain range to the left about where that kangaroo is on that other picture, that's where our home was located. This is how close we came to losing our home with out of control fire. But what concerns me even more is this. The Arctic is on fire. Remember we said earlier about in the North Pole, the beautiful areas surrounding it that have all the animals that we talked about in Siberia, in Alaska, in Norway, in Sweden. Fires broke out this summer that they've never seen the magnitude of before. Siberia recorded a temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 days in a row. They've never seen that before. So this is what the poles are trying to tell us. Our planet is changing. Our planet is responding as naturally it would as we put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But what's most frightening here about the tundra is it traps so much methane. And methane gas captures heat twice as much as carbon dioxide. And this methane now is leaking into our atmosphere and joining the carbon dioxide. The Arctic and Antarctic are heating 3 times faster than the rest of the globe. This indicates by mid-century, the Arctic may be 12 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it is today, releasing hundreds of millions of tons of methane gas into the atmosphere. Folks, we need to stand up. We need to pay attention to this. So I'll say this to you about the Arctic and the Antarctic. They are marvelous places. They are different than any other place on Earth most of us will ever experience. They've been here frozen in time, showing us what the Earth is, how it functions, and how they're part of our beautiful ecosystem. They've been explored by explorers, and now they're telling us something about our future. And I would say this to you, go and see them now. They are spectacular in their beauty. They are an area of our planet that is so different, so critical to life on this planet. I would say go. And I would say go to Antarctica. It will haunt you. Its beauty, its ruggedness, its history, its serenity. If you have a chance to go now, do it. I promise you, you will never, ever forget it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I'd like to transition to the Q&A portion of our program. I should first mention that we have received over 70 pre-submitted questions, so we've grouped some of them based on similar topics and themes. One topic consistently mentioned is that of climate change. While David will answer several questions relating to this, we won't have enough time to sift through all of the issues and inquiries. To this point, I thought it would be beneficial to share an outstanding 5-part climate change series my colleagues have produced. Please find the link in your chat to join Harvard faculty, students, and fellow alumni in conversation about what's happening in the field and how we can help. So let's kick things off with a few questions pertaining to the poles. So David, have the poles always been the world's extremes of cold weather?
Yes, the poles have always experienced extreme weather because of the small amount of sunlight they actually receive. Now, they've moved around. Antarctica, of course, has not always been there, but they do receive the least amount of sunlight, and that's why they stay so cold. Yes.
Thank you. What is the best time of year and place to see the southern aurora?
The southern aurora is tough because they close Antarctica off during the wintertime. You can't fly in, you can't fly out. They stop all tourist travel because of the seas, the heavy seas and the storms that rage. So Antarctica, you might see it from Ushuaia at the tip of South America, but the weather there is really iffy. So I'd say go north, go to Iceland, go to Alaska, go to Norway, go to Sweden. There you will see the aurora. They will be just as spectacular, and it will be easier for you to get there and enjoy them.
Thank you. Well, we know that you have traveled to Antarctica, but have you been to any other place in the other pole? And if so, can you tell us one interesting story?
Well, in the north, I must say, fly fishing at 11 p.m. at night, and it looks like it's 2 in the afternoon outside because it's the white nights, was really an experience. Having to sit in my kayak while ice is calving into the water, sending 4-foot waves your direction, but you can't land on the beach because there's a mother bear and a cub, and you don't want to mess with them. So you're sitting out in the water. That's an experience. And of course, to see the green aurora in Iceland ripple across the sky like a gigantic snake, it's breathtaking. And I must say, Antarctica, once again, it is so different than any of us are used to seeing. And the remoteness, the solitude, it's remarkable. Everybody should at one point in their life experience that. It is truly beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'd agree with that. What has been the impact of tourists on the penguins of Antarctica?
The penguins don't care. You can walk right up to them. They've never had predators that walked on land, so they don't see us as predators. And I will mention this to you. It's a little secret that nobody tells you about penguins. They stink. They really do. But they're loud, they're noisy, they're funny. They walk back and forth like they're wearing little tuxedos, paying no attention to you. It's a marvelous thing.
Yes. Well, we're on the topic of mammals, so let's look at these next two questions. Will the changing landscape force species to migrate to new areas with the potential for new species, such as the grizzly or polar bear?
Ooh, that's a tough one. There's not enough time for evolution to take place and for animals to evolve into something else for changing environments. Evolution takes place over hundreds of millions of years. We don't have that right now. It's changing too quickly. Some will migrate, they will move into other areas, but we're seeing caribou herds really diminished. And as far as the polar bear, I think the best 2 chances for saving the polar bear are, number 1, stop hunting them. You do not need a polar bear rug in your house. And number 2, we will probably transplant them to Antarctica, where they will survive. And why? Because the animals that they will prey upon, the seals and the penguins, have no fear of land hunting animals. They've never seen them. They're attuned to the oceans, where they watch for orcas, they watch for leopard seals. The leopard seals are like the polar bears underwater. So they will protect themselves when they're swimming in the water, but on the land, the polar bears will prey upon them. It's the way nature works. And that is one of the ways we think they may survive.
Interesting, thank you. Switching gears to some of our climate questions coming in. Could you address the differences between global warming that took place in each of the ice ages?
The Earth is schizophrenic. There's been 5 major ice ages that we can document so far. We really don't know the mechanism that causes ice ages or takes them away. Many believe it's the orbit of the sun, the Earth around the sun, around the Milky Way galaxy, that the Earth and sun move our solar system above the plane of the Milky Way and down below the plane of the Milky Way. It undulates like an ocean wave up and down. And during those time periods, it may be enough to change the atmospheric conditions on Earth to go into these major ice ages. We also know that some of the ice ages have been stopped by volcanic activity that has taken place, because volcanic activity puts carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere that forces the Earth to heat back up. So these are natural processes, unlike what we're seeing right now, because humans are the volcanoes putting the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere.
Right, thank you. Do you anticipate a change in ocean currents due to melting ice at polar regions, and how might this affect weather in general?
Oh, this is a scary, slippery slope. When you monitor the ocean currents, there aren't just 1, 2, 3, or 4 ocean currents that travel across our planet. There's hundreds of them, and they're all interconnected. Basically, what the ocean currents do is take the warm water from the tropical regions, deposit into the polar regions, where they cool, they sink, they push the cooler water back into the tropical regions. And this moderates the weather on Earth. It also distributes all the nutrients in the oceans back to different coastlines where the fish feed on them, and humans in our fisheries feed off the fish. So this is a beautiful cycle. It also moderates the weather. What's happening in the oceans moderates what type of storms we have above them. And now that the Atlantic is warming so much, we're seeing more hurricanes, we're seeing more typhoons in the South Pacific. So if we start messing with the ocean currents, if those start changing, we really don't know what the implications could be. We know that the British Isles and the Scandinavian nations depend quite heavily on the warmer waters past their shorelines to keep their temperature moderate. And if those changed and became colder or stagnant and didn't move, there's been a lot of projections, and it's a scary scenario.
David, this next question, what effects of climate change have you personally observed? I know you've touched upon a couple of them, but do you have anything to add?
I do. This is what really struck me the last time I was in Antarctica about 3 years ago. I had a gap of 5 years in between my 2 journeys, and I will be back there next year in December 2021 for the eclipse of the sun, and I will be visiting some of these areas, so I'm very anxious to see them. But what had struck me is, when I was there the first time about 8 years ago, the icebergs that I walked on, the glaciers that I walked on, when I came back were gone. They had receded well over 1.5 miles, 2 miles beyond where I had hiked on them before. And we do see the ice receding, and that struck me. It really stopped me for a moment to think that they had moved that far away. So I'm not sure what I'll see when I go back, but this is a natural process that's taking place. And so that's what stuck with me.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll turn this one over to David for further comment. We've had many similar questions pop up this afternoon about traveling to Antarctica. David, you're a fantastic storyteller, and that could be one of the reasons. So I thought I'd take a moment to just clear that up. You are in luck for those adventurous folks out there. We do have an Antarctica cruise scheduled in January of 2022. We'll be sharing the link to that trip's webpage in our chat. We've been operating trips to the continent for several years, and in fact, I've had the opportunity to go on one, as have David, as you know. So we'd be happy to answer any specific questions that you might have offline. You will have access to our email at the end of the program, so please feel free to get in touch with us. So to that, David, what is the best season to visit Antarctica? You mentioned this briefly, and is it all worth it?
Oh, the best season is actually the only season you can go. Right. And that would be December and January for us here in the Northern Hemisphere, because that's their summer. And then they closed down after that. And I would say, of course, go. Experience this planet, experience the beauty and the magnificence of it. Yes, absolutely go. Treat yourself.
I would agree with that. Two more questions here pertaining to the magnetic poles. Is it true there is no point for the south magnetic pole as there is for the north magnetic pole?
No, there is a south magnetic pole, and here's the difference. We're used to using compasses. Compasses, when we point them here on Earth, point to the magnetic pole of the Earth. If you could look inside of our planet, there is a big, gigantic blob of molten iron that rolls around and generates a magnetic field just like a magnet, and that's why we have the aurora borealis. They're reacting to that magnetic field. And occasionally, every 200 or 300 million years, those poles flip. And when they flip, the north becomes the south and the south becomes the north. But what happens is the magnetic poles are always meandering and wandering. They just can't sit still. Right now, the Antarctic south magnetic pole is about where the Ross Sea is underneath McMurdo Sound. It's moving at about 30 miles an hour as it wanders around. The North Pole moves at about 35 miles per hour. So that's why all the early explorers weren't taking compasses with them. They were taking sextants and they were taking star calculations on the North Star or stars in the Southern Hemisphere to figure exactly where the North Pole, where the Earth spins on its axis, is. So we have two different types of poles, one that wanders and moves and the other that stays pretty steady.
Thank you. Well, we are almost out of time here, and I'd love to end with this fun final question, which brings us back to your love of science, David. Were you interested in aeronautics and space from the time you were young? If so, why? And can you explain a little bit more about that?
I loved aliens when I was a kid. I loved UFOs. I loved looking at the Life magazines my grandmother had in her basements with stories about alien abductions and flying saucers. I loved science fiction. Peter Pan was fun, but fantasy to me was something that never happened and never would. And science fiction just might take place. So I love that aspect. I'm a naturalist first and astronomer second. And so I see the planet Earth as all these different connected fields and areas, one playing off another, whether it's weather or geology or botany or biology, they're all connected. So I've always had this magnificent love for the life on Earth and how it works and the search for life in the universe beyond our own planet. So I've been very fortunate that what I grew up with was a young kid reading science fiction books and dreaming turned out to be a career that allowed me to explore the universe and appreciate the magnificence of what we have here.
Excellent. Well, David, thank you for sharing your love of science with us. And on behalf of the Harvard travel team and our alumni community, thank you for this lecture and your candid remarks. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. As soon as you close out of this webinar, a brief survey will appear. We'd be grateful if you would take the time to complete this survey so we can better serve you. Shortly, you will also receive a follow-up email, including a virtual guide that contains the recording of this lecture and other resources. We hope you'll join us for our next travel talk, Carthage, the Near Eastern Origins of Urbanism in the Maghreb, featuring Joseph Green, former director of the Harvard Museum of Ancient Near East. Thank you again, and please stay well.
Unless you guys are hanging. You can just press E.